to this week's fantasy football recap. I'm Chris Leslie. We're going to go ahead and get into all of the fantasy action from last week and maybe revisit a little bit of our predictions and advice and some of the moves that we contemplated last week and see how those worked out. Also going to take a look at the league, and when I say the league, I mean the league that I play in, our fantasy league, which is Football Mania. We will kind of analyze the happenings of fantasy football through looking at our league, which is, as I mentioned, Football Mania. So, first things first, 2 and 4. That means thumbs up. That means I won. Barely. Squeaked out a victory against, please let me get this name right, Linwood Silicone Pillows. Just think breast implants, silicone pillows. That's the reference there. Linwood is just some really affluent community by where I live. So it's just think really affluent community breast implants. But the actual name is Linwood Silicone Pillows, if that makes any sense. Okay, go ahead and recap that score for you as we get into our fantasy cast. 98 to 92, 6-point margin of victory. As you might recall from our fantasy recap last week, was kind of worried about a few problematic areas because there was a bye week. One was defense, 2 was kicker, and 3 was skill position player. Kind of interesting how all 3 of those worked out, but they all did work out for the better as we got the win. And my name from last week was actually retard short bus what a dumb bleep, SH word. And we've changed that name now in honor of this week's coming opponent. Of course, last week's name was kind of as a way to remember some of the foolhardy mistakes that were made when it came to fantasy football. Okay, so let's go through this and recap this matchup. First of all, final score 98 to 92. We'll compare the quarterbacks. For my new team name. I'm sorry, I should go there first. The new team name, which I just changed, is soon to be winner of Week 7 Toilet Bowl, and that is because I'm facing F you guys, I quit, and he and I both have a record of 2 and 6. We'll get into that matchup in a little bit, but the winner of that matchup will be in much better shape than the loser, let's just say. So the new name is, we'll just say soon to be winner of the Week 7 Toilet Bowl for our purposes here. So we'll get back into this and we'll take a look at the quarterback matchups. We had Michael Vick, who was at Washington yesterday, going against the Eli Manning, who was at home against Buffalo. Honestly, this is fantasy football, so I didn't really bother to look up the final scores of any of these games as far as who won and lost. I know that the Eagles did win. They looked pretty good, and they looked a lot better collectively yesterday than they have probably all season. The Giants made a much better showing for themselves against the Buffalo Bills at home, and really kind of a disappointing showing for the Buffalo Bills, to be honest with you. They did not perform as you would have expected them to. So, Michael Vick against Eli Manning. Michael Vick won that matchup, scoring 16 fantasy points. His numbers, 18 of 31, 237 yards with a touchdown. Pretty solid day for Michael Vick there. Oh, you can't see my thumb there. Thumbs up. Eli Manning, just 11 points, which was actually less stellar from a fantasy perspective than last week when he lost. Which kind of tells you something. There are times when winning the game doesn't necessarily mean a good fantasy day, and vice versa. So Eli Manning was 21 of 32, 292 yards, and it doesn't look like he had any touchdowns. So that's kind of putting your fantasy owner out to dry there. Only scoring 11 points from the quarterback position. Usually, at least in our league, it'll take more than that to win on a weekly basis. Now, going down to the running backs matchup, this was one that, quite frankly, had me pretty worried. Because, as you know, one of my running backs, Joseph Adai, he was injured last week, and it turned out didn't play. He was a scratch. He's still on the roster, but obviously he was a need that would need to be addressed. And one of our other top running backs, Willis McGahee, of course, had a bye week. So, first running back matchup, Michael Turner from the Atlanta Falcons against Frank Gore of the San Francisco 49ers. Now, both of those running backs are quite good, and they've put up some pretty good numbers this year. And it wasn't necessarily this particular matchup that made me worry. It was the collective arsenal of running backs that Linwood Silicone Pillows had compared to mine collectively. So, Michael Turner against Frank Gore. Michael Turner, of course, going against the Carolina Panthers, and Frank Gore going against the Detroit Lions. Interestingly enough, the Atlanta Falcons, victorious, Michael Turner's team, as were the San Francisco 49ers, who are off to a pretty good start in defeating the Detroit Lions on the road. Backslap. For all of you knows who that is, Jim Harbaugh. And what's his name? Phil Schwartz. I think that's his name. Anyways, Michael Turner had an outstanding fantasy day. This is probably, I would gander, his best fantasy day of the season thus far. 139 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So, let's break this down. 6 points for a touchdown. 6, 12, then 10 points for every yard, 1 point for every yard rushing. So, you got 10 for the 100. Plus another 3. So there's 13 plus 12. No mathematician, but that equals 25 fantasy points. And that is an outstanding fantasy performance, courtesy of Mr. Michael Turner. Really, really probably key and instrumental in our victory, which was only, need I remind you, a 6-point victory. So his 25 points, big. Frank Gore was no slouch. He had 141 yards rushing, so 2 more yards than Michael Turner, which would of course account for 14 fantasy points. However, he only had 1 TD, which, as you know, 6 points. So, 5-point edge for Michael Turner, which in a game that was won by 6, pretty key. Next running back matchup. Jahvid Best of the Detroit Lions. Of course, we mentioned his respective team and how they fared earlier, against Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings, who was at Chicago, and his team just got absolutely obliterated by the Chicago Bears. So it wasn't even close, and whatever the score was, it was less close than that at the end of the game. In other words, the Bears pretty much dominated that game from start to finish. Jahvid Best, only 37 yards rushing,
right. Well,
but he managed to score 10 points. So that tells me something, that he must have had, well, 37 yards rushing. That's 3 points plus 6 is 9. I wonder why they gave him 10.
Yeah.
Maybe he had some yards passing, some reception yards too. That's probably my guess.
Well, she should.
10 points, not tremendous, but pretty darn good. Against Adrian Peterson. And he had just 9 points. So again, Jahvid Best won that matchup as well, which was not something I was expecting. Obviously, Adrian Peterson's one of the best running backs in the NFL, and particularly where fantasy football is concerned. Adrian Peterson, a mere 39 yards and a touchdown, giving him 9 points. So, thus far, quarterback matchup, check. First running back matchup, check. Second running back matchup, check. The first 3 matchups in this game going our way. So it looks pretty good, right? Alright, now, this is where we get into a little bit of kind of tricky comparisons, because given the situation with the running backs, I was not in a position to go with 3 running backs in my lineup. I chose rather 3 wide receivers and 2 running backs. So we will have my wide receiver against one of his ample stable of running backs. And my first wide receiver was Marcus Colston of the New Orleans Saints. Now, Marcus Colston of the New Orleans Saints had an absolutely brilliant game from a fantasy perspective. Of course, they were playing against Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers, which they did go ahead and get a victory. Marcus Colston, 118 yards receiving and a touchdown for 17 fantasy points. Here's a here, actually, let me just balance the notebook here. You can't see the notebook, but it's on my lap, no pun intended. 2 thumbs up and a back slap for Marcus Colston for that great effort. 17 points. That's outstanding. Now, that is matched up against his other Silicone Pillows' other great running back, Maurice Jones-Drew of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he got 9 points. So again, this was a matchup that we were quite fearful of going into this week's game. And we had an 8-point advantage at this position as well. Our wide receiver versus their third running back. Of course, you know, I have no idea who won between Jacksonville and Pittsburgh. Quite frankly, I don't care. But we got an 8-point advantage there. So far, 1, 2, 3, 4. First 4 matchups decisively in our favor. Looking good, right? Okay, well, here's where things kind of start to turn around a little bit. Okay, one of the issues that I mentioned last week as far as concerns that needed to be addressed were skill position, okay? Because of the injury to Jabba Best and, I apologize, Joseph Adai, and then the bye week for Dwayne Bowe and Willis McGahee. So, as you may recall, one of the ways that I went ahead and addressed that was I picked up Santana Moss on waivers, who had just come off of a bye week, hoping that I could get some moderate to average production from him as a #1 wide receiver to kind of help me make up for that deficit that was missing due to the bye week. Well, not so much. He was against the Philadelphia Eagles, as you recall, who pretty much kicked the you-know-what out of the Washington Redskins, and only was good for 3 points. Now, this is a wide receiver matchup, and it's against Linwood Silicone Pillows' first wide receiver, and that was Johnny Knox of the Bears, and you know what they did, 4 points. So, that matchup went Silicone Pillows' way, but only by 1 point. So far, no big deal. And our wise, infinite wisdom as far as addressing the skill position need, good idea, but it didn't necessarily work out the way that we drew it up. Oh well. Okay, next matchup. Another wide receiver matchup, and that's Deshaun Jackson against Dez Bryant. Now, Deshaun Jackson, since we've traded for him a few weeks ago, has been very solid for us. Not necessarily the case yesterday. Yesterday, just 46 yards and no touchdowns for a total of 4 points, going against Dez Bryant of the Cowboys, who was facing the New England Patriots. His team nearly pulled off a victory, but not quite. But he did pull off 7 points. So, that's a 3-point edge for Linwood Silicone Pillows so far, and there's 2 matchups their way. Both of the wide receiver matchups, actually, head-to-head wide receiver matchups, went their way. And then the running back / wide receiver matchup went our way. The next matchup is the tight end, and that is Greg Olsen of the Buffalo Bills. Of course, they lost to Philadelphia, versus Brandon Pettigrew of the Lions. Not a very good performance for Greg Olson of Carolina. He had a total of 42 yards, no touchdowns, for a total of 4 fantasy points. Not usually going to win you that matchup, and it didn't against Brandon Pettigrew, who had a very solid day production-wise for a tight end, as he managed 42 yards and a touchdown for a total of 10 fantasy points against the 49ers. So, again, if you're paying attention, let's see, the first 1, 2, 3, 4 matchups our way, and now the second 1, 2, 3 matchups his way. So things are starting to tighten up, and you'll see why I had cause for concern and high anxiety all day once I explained kind of the scenario of how all this went down. Now we have defenses, okay? And if you remember from last week, defense was an issue that was one of my key issues out of those 3 we identified to address. And we took a risk that didn't really pan out too well. We dropped the Dallas defense. No backslap here. That's more of a kick in the head. Just visualize. Dropped the Dallas defense because they were playing against the New England Patriots, who have just butchered every defense they've faced this year. Dropped them in favor of the Buffalo Bills defense, who looked pretty strong last week against the Philadelphia Eagles. Got a lot of turnovers, so I was hoping that would be a key move that was going to help us this week. Unfortunately, it did not. -1 against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, here's where this could have really, really bit us. Linwood Silicone Pillows made a move picking up the Philadelphia Eagles defense. Now, if that doesn't sound familiar, it should, because that was our first defense that we drafted this season, and it was the defense that we had used probably for the first 4 weeks of the season, and until last week when we finally went with Jacksonville, because Philadelphia had been so disappointing. Anyhow, we ended up cutting Philadelphia's defense. They were good for 15 points yesterday. 15 to -1. That's a 16-point difference. Now, starting to sweat. This is starting to get a little bit close. So now the first 1, 2, 3, 4 matchups go our way. Now the next 1, 2, 3, 4 his way. So 5th and final matchup, what turns out was definitely probably the deciding factor, the kickers. Okay? And coincidentally, the guy we had kicking, who did quite well for us the week before, Nick Novak, of course, bye week. So that was definitely near probably the top of our needs last week as far as what we were going to address. And we did. We did that in the form of Billy Cundiff, the kicker of the Baltimore Ravens. Quite pleased there here. Backslap. Alright. And the reason why we get a backslap for that one is because Billy Cundiff, 5 for 5 field goals and 2 for 2 extra points. So 5 times 3 is 15 and 17. So 17 points. So some of his field goals were probably longer, which usually will give you more points. I don't have time to delve into those specifics, but 20 points for Billy Cundiff, and versus and of course, I don't know if Baltimore defeated Houston or not, but I do know that Ryan Lindell of the Buffalo Bills was 1 of 1 and 3 for 3 extra points, and he only got 7 points. So that's a plus 13 in the fantasy column. So backslap, 2 thumbs up, whatever. That was a great move. Billy Cundiff paid huge dividends for us this week, and arguably, well, without Billy Cundiff, probably would not have come out victorious this week. So quickly, just looking at the bench, the only 2 moves that we could have made differently, could have played Ben Roethlisberger instead of Michael Vick. We would have gotten 4 less points. That would have not helped us, obviously. And this would have helped. We could have played Jacksonville's defense and gotten 3 points instead of -1, which no mathematician, but I think that's like a 4-point swing. So that we could have been 4 points better. So as far as the moves we made with what we had on the roster, pretty good. Now, what we did to get what we had on the roster, that's another debatable point. For Linwood silicone pillows. Uh-oh, what just happened? Shoot. Looks like our fantasy thing just refreshed. He definitely could have done some things different, because he could have replaced either Adrian Peterson or Maurice Jones-Drew with Cedric Benson. But who really would have anticipated that? Cedric Benson had 11 points. That's only actually a two-point change. Not that big of a deal. Wide receiver-wise, he could have put in Reggie Wayne in favor of Johnny Knox. That's a 1 point swing, so there's 3 points. And let's see. No, so that's all he could have done. So he played his pretty well. 3 points would not have impacted the game one way or the other. So so he played that as well as he could. Now, for me, this was a very nerve-wracking day of trying to keep track of the fantasy football matchups, because most of his players, most of my players played in the early games, and at the end of during most of the early games I was behind, but then at the end of the 1 o'clock games I had a lead of about, I think it was 98 to 79, so 19-point lead, but he still had Adrian Peterson and Johnny Knox to play. So during that Sunday night game, as you can imagine, I was sweating it out, to say the least. So that's what happened in my matchup this week. And Dallas's defense, as I mentioned, had a great day, like 15 points or something like that. So that would have helped. But we didn't have them, of course, because we were dumb and we let them go. So we are going to take a short break. And then when we come back, we'll take a look around the league, see what happened, and take a look at the other teams, and then continue this week's recap, this week's fantasy football recap, right here on the CALX network. I'm Chris Leslie. We'll be right back.